Welcome to Lesson 3 of Managing Successful Teams course of the Nonprofit Bootcamp e-learning series. By definition, community-based work brings together a diverse mix of people with various experiences, strengths, and perspectives. In its highest form, this mix of voices can work in successful harmony, drawing out the best from individual participants who generate new ideas together. Sometimes, however, unaligned voices can create conflict and confusion. It takes effective leadership to bring a group into harmony and avoid chaos. Today's presenter is Amy Vasquez, principal of Amy Vasquez Consulting. For over 20 years, Amy Vasquez has had a rich experience as a leader, fundraiser, and facilitator of organizations working for progressive change, raising over $200 million for clients and employers. Amy is particularly passionate about and experienced in effecting positive changes in our food system. She has held national leadership positions in this sector, including the founding director of Chefs Collaborative, the development director for Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture, and the interim executive director of the Organic Farming Research Foundation. Amy resides in Columbus, Ohio, where she manages Produce Parks Columbus, part of Ohio's statewide farmers market incentive program, and volunteers for the Bexley Farmers Market and the Franklin County Local Food Council. With that, I'll hand it over to Amy.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everybody. As Andrew shared, this is the last in the series of 3 conversations on managing successful teams. And today we're really going to get tactical and talk about the habits of successful teams. As members of the Food Systems Leadership Network, each of us seeks positive change in our food system in our various organizations and work, and we often find I'm having trouble here, sorry. Oh, there we go, a little glitch. Jumped way ahead. So each week I've asked you to check in with yourself before we begin our work together for the hour. And we've talked about check-ins as being a way to facilitate introductions and underscore the purpose of a conversation when you're meeting in person. They help to give voice to everyone in the room and build trust on a team. Virtually or in a presentation like this, they can be a way to set focus for the work ahead and drop other personal distractions for the day, and really be present in this conversation. So very simply, our check-in question for ourselves today is, what do you need to switch off to be fully present? Is it a deadline? Is it a family situation? Is it your phone or other screens? Whatever it is, please do that now. Quick recap of our first 2 lessons. The meta lesson of this series has been that by working together, teams get good stuff done. The proverb that we shared was, if you want to go further, go together. In lesson 1, we talked about essential characteristics of teams, that diversity is one of them, and that building and sustaining trust among that diversity is critical to your team's efficacy. And in the second lesson, last week, we talked about how your own personal leadership style affects your team's success. Who you are is how you lead. Self-awareness through feedback and other assessments can help you lead teams with your truth. Today's objective is to identify the basic and everyday tactics and practices that strengthen the efficacy and impact of our teams. Collectively, teams solve problems, they get creative, they can innovate, and for the most part, meetings are the place where much of that framework happens. So today we're going to talk about what productive and effective teamwork looks like. We'll talk about meeting design so that creativity and innovation can happen. We'll talk about what the participant mix looks like and how to engage participants. We'll then go into structuring powerful agendas and framing productive conversations with guidelines and boundaries. And then in that framework, the design, the people, the agenda, your boundaries, how then to host generative conversations. And then closing out a meeting with how you track decisions and action items. And finally, how technology can lift all of that up to its best version of itself. Last week, more than 60% of you identified yourself as leaders of a team as a primary role. The rest, for the most part, said that you were a team participant. Some said you were co-leaders and some didn't answer. So I've framed the majority of the following with that pulse poll in mind, and with full recognition that we all wear many hats. And this is just one way to make these activities relevant to your work. So hopefully there's a lot of very tactical stuff here today that can spark ideas for you, and we can talk more specifically about how to make them relevant in your situation, in the Zoom session that follows, or in the office hours that you may sign up for. So, good meetings matter. How we meet is as important as the content of the meeting itself, I believe. In fact, I might say that how we meet informs what content is generated. So how can we prepare and design a good meeting? What are the essentials of leading a good meeting? And how can we embed a culture of good practices into our work and workplace? Good meetings are built on relationships, so the team can be as productive as they face the challenges that they do and solve the problems that they're set up to tackle. And we've talked about how diversity of input strengthens our results. And we've all, I know, been in bad meetings. They undermine the potential of successful collaboration. And so we're really here today to talk about the brass tacks of what makes a good meeting. Rather than presentations, they are a place where you do work together. The meetings are the work. And to do them well and intentionally do something different takes some prep. But hopefully doing so can improve their quality and maybe even reduce their frequency. So designing a meeting, basically this is the why and the what of a good meeting. First, identify a need. The need is the compelling reason for doing anything. Sensing this is the first step for designing a meeting or any initiative that is that's relevant. The need is outside of the work. It's the thing that is served by the work that you're doing. It's the reason the work is important and necessary. So why are you doing this, right? That's the question to put in your mind as you start. And the answer can be to brainstorm an idea for an article or to address a situation that's emerged in a program that you're running. And I think another question that is equally important is to identify if there's not a need, don't meet. I think we all instinctively know this, but we get trapped in this habit of gathering. And if the team is big enough, just going around the room to share will take several hours. One of the most powerful questions you can ask out of the gate is, does this need to be a meeting? Can you solve this in a one-on-one conversation, by email, in a Slack update, co-edit a Google Doc? There are all kinds of other solutions to that problem. Don't meet to meet. There's technology to help you advance that objective. So out of your need then comes the clarity of purpose, and purpose statements are great guideposts when they're clear and compelling. I like to put them at the top of every agenda of a meeting that I run, whether that's with clients or with colleagues. And they can draw people into their meeting by asking, where should we be heading? What work could we be doing together or creating together? What could we inspire by meeting? They answer the question, what is my organization's role in the project? So really orienting participants to the reason everyone's around the table right at the back. And then also think of if we've talked about the purpose as the why and the what, then think about meeting design as the when and the where and the how. How much time do you need? What time of day? What needs to happen before or after to make this meeting successful is all part of the when. The where, think about your space. How does this space support your need or purpose? Or if you're online, how do you have to adjust how you're structuring the conversation to really facilitate the best dialogue from folks? Is there a part of is this part of a standard meeting team that you can address this objective, or should you go off site? And the how part, is to have everybody fully present. Do you need a facilitator, or can you run this with your own team? Do you need food? Do you need to go for a walk in the middle? So really think about meeting design before you ever put an agenda together. And then the who is the participant mix. And we've talked about this initially, building diverse teams in past lessons, but how does it really work when you're bringing all the different types of people together? When you're thinking of inviting people beyond just a staff meeting, and maybe even an internal meeting, consider who is most effective, who are your supporters, who influences your ability to succeed, who's not involved that you might want to bring in, and who are we concerned about engaging and why. These are just a few of the questions you could ask to get at the question of whose perspectives need to be taken into account when you're having a specific conversation. Also part of participant engagement is the idea that we've discussed in both of the last two sessions, building and sustaining relationships. From the get-go, how people are invited to a meeting. If you're trying to signal that there's a new conversation happening, perhaps you're inviting people in a new way. You're calling up and really requesting that they be present for this conversation, or you're sending an evite rather than just a calendar invite, or sending a direct and personal email. Once people are in the room, and this is something we've practiced and talked about, but this idea of check-ins, a personal question or a mission-based question is, in addition to the introductions, is a great way to bring the full person into the room. And on the flip side of that, closeouts do the same thing. Continues to build relationships and can also reinforce the learning of the meeting's purpose while inviting action or next steps. For example, what commitments are we willing to make on what was decided today, or what action am I inspired to take? Name tags and tent cards are also great, particularly if they're new people in the room, and even if they're slightly new people in the room. I'm lousy at remembering people's names, and I'm always embarrassed when I say the wrong name for someone, which seems to happen more and more frequently. And I love it when a meeting facilitator takes the guesswork out of that for me by putting the name in front of my face. Think about free periods and social time in and around your meeting. Are you breaking for lunch and not talking about the agenda and not doing work? Are you gathering the night before and having a meal together? Or are you simply allowing time on the agenda for people to meet one-on-one? Those are great ways to help to build the relationship outside of the work. Mentoring is also a great way to build and sustain relationships, whether that's service on a board where new board members are assigned seasoned board members as mentors, where they can safely ask questions and help them navigate both the activities and the process of how that board meets. I've also been involved in groups where a specific task force of people are assigned follow-up calls to everyone, both to evaluate their response to the meeting, to reinforce assignments or deliver activities. And they also can be a place for that question and answer and mentoring relationship to occur. So those are all ways to think about deepening your engagement with folks in any kind of meeting. Next, we think about agendas and how to create powerful ones. As I said earlier, stating your purpose at the top of the meeting is a great way to signal to everybody, that's why you're around the table, that's why you're on your phones, that's why you're meeting, is to discuss that purpose. And I often reinforce the purpose by getting at specific questions for each segment of the agenda so that you're clear that it's not simply sharing for sharing's sake, but there is a question that you want the voices gathered to speak to address, or to think about. I like to also provide housekeeping information up front, where the kitchen is, where the water is, where the bathroom is, and when there's time on the agenda to go there. Helps people mind not wander to say, oh, is this the right time that I should be getting up and leaving? You set those boundaries right up front. I also include time segments on every agenda that I create, whether that's from 2 to 2:30 or 30 minutes, just really cluing people into how much time you want to allot for each element of your agenda. It also gives everybody in the meeting the ability to say, hey, we're running off time. But it sets expectations up front for everybody to know how deep you're going or how shallow on specific topics. On agendas, I also like to identify speakers for each section, and really be intentional about making sure that lots of voices are in the room. Particularly for a long amount of time, it's good to share that, share the microphone, as it were, so that people are hearing from different voices. It gives the break to somebody who's not have to carry the whole meeting themselves. And it also, it's also helpful to get people to play different roles. So while someone's speaking, someone's actively listening and taking notes. Maybe 2 people are doing that. Maybe somebody's assigned the role of timekeeper, but you can make sure that all those roles are identified up at the front and on the agenda. All voices at the table is just a reminder that we learn by doing. And so how are you engaging people in the conversation? Rather than just presenting to them, do you allow for breakouts? Do you ask specific questions where you want the people gathered to answer out to the whole group, to answer for themselves? One thing that if you have a free section on your agenda, you might I work with a lot of groups who use a talking stick or some sort of totem that they pass around, where that's the permission to speak, to make sure that you're really encouraging all people to participate. It's also helpful to remember to break things up. We can't sustain doing one thing for too long. None of us can. So ask questions after a long presentation. If it's a long day, get people moving, either into breakouts in another room or into small group discussions, or have people stand up and stretch even. I've led a whole conference room full of people in a couple yoga poses at the end of a long thinking day, and make sure to provide time for bio breaks. And I think it's important also that we leave time to summarize and evaluate. So often we run out of time and run out of the room, so give yourself adequate time to summarize the decisions you've made and what's coming next. This keeps the momentum going and sets you up for success in the next meeting. If there's time, consider a checkout or a meeting evaluation. So establishing a framework is really about thinking about how you get the work done. What boundaries can you put in place to make sure that the group stays focused on time and on topic? Principles of cooperation help us know how we will work together, and it's important that these be simple, co-owned, and well understood. You can co-create them at the start of the meeting, as with the container building exercise that we talked about in week 1, or simply have a list of guidelines that people read through together and reflect on, or add to. So this list are ways that you can create a framework in the meeting. And this is, again, before you ever get to work. We'll talk about container building on the next slide. Permission slips are another trust building activity, but asking yourself or the group what you need, what you give yourself permission to do, feel, and not do to show up for the conversation. I'll show you an example of ground rules on the next slide. We've talked about scribe and timekeeper. Somebody last week mentioned the idea of a focus marshal, which I think is brilliant, who keeps you both on the agenda and on time. And the idea of using a parking lot or an eco-friendly bike rack as a place to put those good ideas that come up but might not be on topic to the agenda. The container building exercise is 3 simple questions we talked about. What do you need to show up to the work? What will get in the way of you showing up for the work? And what does support look like? Ask everybody to write that down, and then cluster the 3 answers together to see the similarities and the differences, and co-create those ground rules together. It's a great thing to do at the start of a series of meetings and can become the ground rules for an ongoing team too. Or it can be meeting specific. These are meeting guidelines that I've used with a client in the past on a big sticky that we keep on the wall next to the agenda. Speak your mind and respect the agenda. Share the air. Honor time. Listen to understand. Assume positive intent. No shaming or blaming. Silence technology. No side conversations. And in this case, the group added limit jargon. Lots of acronyms were being used, and there were a bunch of new people in the room who had no idea. And those acronyms actually meant something else in their world. So we asked everybody to speak out the full names of the things they otherwise would put in abbreviated letters. And so then with all that framework in mind, which sounds like a lot of work when you just wanted to show up to a meeting, with all that prep work in mind, is really so that you can get to a generative and creative conversation where the meeting becomes the work and new ideas emerge because there are different perspectives around the table. So there are 2 things I ask that you keep in mind when hosting those kind of creative discussions. First, know where you are. There are 3 kinds of conversations, and we try to rush. They can happen sequentially, or a whole meeting can be about one of those 3 elements, divergent or emergent or convergent. We try to rush through that arc often in a meeting when we might want to really spend a decent amount of time in that middle space, in that emergent space. Divergent is the goal-seeking meeting where no clear goal has yet been set. This is more likely a planning meeting or a community meeting at the start of its process rather than an ongoing staff meeting. And asking the right questions and having clear shared purpose gives collective direction to this kind of divergent meeting. And on the other spectrum, a convergent meeting is where things are very linear and focused and goal-oriented. Quick decisions can be made. This is perhaps a team that's been meeting for a while, an internal staff meeting, or at the end of a planning process. Convergence happens when there's flow and trust, and conclusions and decisions can come quickly and assignments can be made. It's that middle place, that emergent place, that is the sparky part of our meetings. Sometimes it's the groan zone between the chaos and total control. And if we already knew the answers to the questions we're trying to solve, we perhaps wouldn't be meeting. So that emergent place is important. We're bringing a lot of different people together to hear their ideas, and all this agenda structure that I have been talking about and trust building gets you to this place. So you do want to get here, even though sometimes it's uncomfortable. It may require us to stretch our brains, to hold our tongues, to hold other points of view in our mind and mull them over, listen and reflect. And good meetings, particularly trying to get at new ideas, might need to stay here longer than is comfortable. So as a facilitator, don't rush to fix this space and get you to convergence. Inviting creativity in the divergent phase, this is where powerful questions come in. What inspires you about this topic? What opportunities do you see? To focus our intention, invite reflection and connect ideas in that emergent space, asking, what are you noticing? What are we learning? And at the end, to generate momentum in the convergent phase, we can ask, what needs our attention going forward? But those powerful questions help you keep in the phases that you're in and really get and harvest the right information out of folks that you've intended them to contribute by gathering them. Tracking decisions. We've talked about having a scribe and reporter. Sometimes they can be 2 people, sometimes 1, taking notes for the meeting and reporting them out. A meeting harvest is language that's used in art of hosting meetings, where you're harvesting the key decisions that are made. I've often seen a harvest that's drawn rather than written. In Dare to Lead, Brene talks about quick minutes, where one person is responsible for writing them down and everybody takes their own notes, but together verbally, they acknowledge the date of the meeting, the intention, the attendees, the decisions, and the task and ownership. Last week, the Wallace Center team talked about using RACI. Every decision identified is a person who's responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. And don't forget the parking lot. That's not where good ideas should go to die. Make sure that those get reflected back in your minutes in whatever form they're in. This is a visual way that I've seen meetings tracked, where a big piece of paper on the board can be held up for everybody to shout out things that go in that and to reinforce what's happening, where you are, and what the action items are. And then finally, using technology. I think a whole boot camp series perhaps could be run on this alone. Technology obviously has the opportunity to bring us together in new ways. And this webinar is an example of that, with both the presentation in the GoToMeeting and the office hours in Zoom. But it also can create more barriers. It's hard to do breakout discussions, for example, or go for a walk when you're on the screen or on the phone. So technology can be used to help host your meetings. Conference calls are a pretty classic way of doing that. Zoom, Google Hangout, and Skype. Often many of these meetings, whether they're in person or over the computer, might also have people on a phone. And so thinking about all the different platforms folks are using and being inclusive and not leaving someone behind is important when either you're introducing new technology or sort of living between technologies. And obviously there's technology that helps your team in between meetings, PowerPoints and AV, surveys and evaluation, sharing, co-creating information via Google Docs, not having meetings and using something like Slack, which was mentioned in a previous office hours, is a great way to give program updates to program staff rather than coming and sitting around the table and sharing your own updates. And then Google Drive, Dropbox, and Box are all places where, the collective file cabinet where people can leave their shared information. These are all ways that technology can support teamwork, and I think we're all just beginning to learn how these work most effectively. So in conclusion, good meetings can bring out the best in teams. Be intentional about your meeting design to really support that good work. And create a framework with boundaries and roles and responsibilities that allows everyone to thrive. Don't forget to ask powerful questions that sort of keep you in that generative space, and use technology wisely to foster relationships. That concludes my presentation part of this boot camp session, and we'll move into office hours. Andrew will take us through to that. And don't forget to sign up for one-on-one coaching if you're interested. Andrew sent that link out earlier today. And always use the FSLN forum for a continued conversation about how you're working, what questions you have, and how others gathered can help you. Thank you so much for your time.